The morning sun cast long shadows across the manicured gardens of Kensington Palace as Catherine, Princess of Wales, stood at her bedroom window, watching her husband prepare for what would become one of the most emotionally charged royal duties of their marriage. Prince William moved with the practiced efficiency of someone who had learned to compartmentalize his feelings, but Catherine could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw tightened as he adjusted his military uniform one final time. Today was different from their usual royal engagements. Today, William would be representing the crown at a memorial service that would test every fiber of his emotional restraint. The event was for families who had lost loved ones in a recent tragedy that had shaken the nation to its core. 23 young people had died in a preventable accident, and the grief that followed had touched every corner of British society, including the royal family. Catherine had been scheduled to accompany her husband, as she often did for such solemn occasions. Her presence brought a gentle warmth that complemented William's more formal approach to royal duties. Together, they had perfected the art of providing comfort while maintaining the dignity expected of their positions. But 3 days earlier, everything had changed with a single phone call that would alter the course of not just this engagement, but their entire understanding of duty versus personal crisis. The call had come at precisely 11:30 in the evening. Catherine remembered the exact time because she had been reading to their youngest child, and the bedside clock had caught her attention just moments before her phone buzzed with an unknown number. Her private secretary's voice was strained, carefully professional, but unable to completely mask the gravity of what he was about to reveal. Her father, Michael Middleton, had collapsed during what should have been a routine business meeting. The initial reports were confusing, contradictory. Some sources suggested a heart attack, others mentioned a stroke. What was certain was that he had been rushed to a private hospital in London, and the prognosis was uncertain. The family was being asked to gather quickly. Catherine had felt the familiar weight of her dual existence pressing down upon her. As a daughter, every instinct screamed at her to abandon everything and rush to her father's side. As a future queen, she understood that her public duties carried responsibilities that extended far beyond her personal feelings. The memorial service was not just another engagement that could be rescheduled. Families who had lost everything were counting on the royal family's presence to acknowledge their pain and provide some measure of official recognition for their suffering. William had found her sitting on the edge of their bed an hour later, still holding her phone, tears streaming silently down her face. He had not needed to ask what was wrong. In the years since their marriage, he had learned to read the subtle changes in her expression, the way she held herself when the weight of royal life became almost unbearable. This time was different, though. This time, the conflict between duty and family was not theoretical or distant. It was immediate and devastating. They had talked through the night, exploring every possible alternative. Could the engagement be postponed? The answer was no. The grieving families had already made tremendous efforts to coordinate their schedules, and many had traveled from across the country. Could another member of the royal family step in? Again, the answer was complicated. The specific nature of the tragedy required someone with William's military background, and his particular approach to speaking with those who had lost loved ones in circumstances that echoed his own mother's death. By dawn, they had reached a decision that satisfied neither of them, but seemed to be the only viable option. William would attend the memorial service alone, while Catherine would go to her father. It was a compromise that honored both their public responsibilities and their private obligations, but it came with an emotional cost that neither of them had fully anticipated. The decision had been communicated to the palace staff with characteristic royal discretion. The official statement would be simple. The Princess of Wales was dealing with a family matter and would not be attending the memorial service. No details would be provided, no explanations offered. The public would be left to speculate, as they always did, about the private lives of their future monarchs. But for Catherine and William, the weight of this decision went far deeper than public relations concerns. They had built their marriage on the foundation of being partners in everything: their royal duties, their parenting, their efforts to modernize the monarchy while respecting its traditions. This would be the first time since their wedding that they would face a major royal engagement separated not by choice, but by circumstances that highlighted the impossible tensions inherent in their positions. As Catherine watched William that morning, she saw not just her husband preparing for a difficult day, but a man grappling with the loneliness that came with royal duty. She wanted to tell him that she would be thinking of him throughout the day, that her heart would be with him even as her body was at her father's bedside. But the words seemed inadequate for the magnitude of what they were both feeling. William turned from the mirror and caught her reflection in the window. For a moment, they simply looked at each other across the room, and in that silent exchange, years of shared experiences, mutual understanding, and deep love passed between them. He crossed the room slowly, his military boots echoing on the hardwood floor, and stood beside her at the window. Outside, the palace grounds were coming to life with the usual morning activity. Staff members moved purposefully across the courtyards, beginning the day's preparations for various royal activities. In a few hours, this same scene would be repeated at the memorial service, where William would stand alone on a platform, representing not just himself, but the entire institution of the monarchy. Catherine reached for his hand, and they stood together in silence, watching the world outside their window. Neither of them spoke, but both understood that this moment represented something profound in their relationship. They had weathered public scandals, media intrusions, and the constant pressure of living their lives under global scrutiny. But this was different. This was about the fundamental tension between who they were as people and who they were required to be as representatives of the crown. The memorial service was scheduled to begin at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. By that time, Catherine would be sitting in a sterile hospital room, holding her father's hand while William stood before hundreds of grieving families, trying to find words that could somehow make sense of senseless loss. They would be miles apart, but both would be carrying the weight of impossible expectations and the knowledge that their personal pain was secondary to their public responsibilities. As the morning progressed, the palace machinery moved into action around them. Cars were arranged, security details coordinated, press statements carefully crafted. The official schedule would proceed as planned, with one notable absence that would be explained in the most minimal terms possible. The public would see William arriving alone, and they would draw their own conclusions about Catherine's absence. But for those who knew them personally, who understood the depth of their partnership, and the way they had learned to support each other through the challenges of royal life, William's solitary figure would tell a different story. It would speak to the sacrifices that royal duty demanded, not just from the individuals who wore the crowns and carried the titles, but from their families, their relationships, and their fundamental human need for connection and support. The phone call from the hospital came at 10:30, just as Catherine was preparing to leave. Her father's condition had stabilized, but he was not yet conscious. The doctors were cautiously optimistic, but they emphasized that the next 24 hours would be critical. Catherine's mother, Carol, was already at the hospital, along with her siblings Pippa and James. They were maintaining a quiet vigil, taking turns sitting with their father and trying to process the sudden shift from routine normalcy to medical crisis. Catherine updated William on her father's condition as they walked together toward the palace entrance where their separate cars were waiting. His face reflected the complex mix of relief and continued concern that she was feeling herself. They both understood that while the immediate crisis might be passing, the emotional impact of this day would linger for much longer. The media presence outside the palace was heavier than usual, with photographers and reporters hoping to capture some glimpse of the royal couple as they departed for their respective destinations. Catherine and William had long since learned to navigate these public moments while maintaining their privacy, but today felt different. Today, their separation would be visible to everyone, and the speculation about its meaning would begin immediately. As they reached the entrance hall, William's private secretary approached with final details about the memorial service. The families would be seated in the front rows, with government officials and other dignitaries filling the remaining spaces. William would deliver a brief address, participate in a moment of silence, and then spend time speaking individually with family members who wished to share their memories or simply receive his acknowledgement of their loss. Catherine listened to these details with a heavy heart, knowing that she should be there to provide the support that only she could offer her husband during such emotionally demanding circumstances. She had attended dozens of similar events, and she understood how draining they could be, how William would return home that evening carrying the weight of other people's grief along with his own unspoken emotions. Their final moments together before departure were spent in relative silence, each lost in their own thoughts about the day ahead. They had said everything that needed to be said during their long conversation the night before. Now, it was simply a matter of carrying out the decisions they had made and trusting that their relationship was strong enough to weather this temporary separation. The last thing Catherine saw as her car pulled away from Kensington Palace was William standing alone at the entrance, watching her departure before turning to enter his own vehicle. In that brief glimpse, she saw everything she loved about her husband: his sense of duty, his quiet strength, his ability to carry burdens that would crush most people. But she also saw the loneliness that came with his position, the isolation that even their strong marriage could not always penetrate. As her car navigated the London traffic toward the hospital, Catherine reflected on the strange parallel paths their day would take. She would be fighting for her father's life, while William would be honoring those who had already lost that fight. Both of them would be dealing with grief, fear, and the helpless feeling that came with confronting human mortality. But they would be doing it separately, connected only by their shared understanding of duty and their deep love for each other. The hospital corridor was quiet except for the soft sound of medical equipment and occasional footsteps of staff members moving between rooms. Catherine's family had gathered in a small waiting area near her father's room, their faces reflecting the exhaustion and stress of the past several hours. Her mother looked up as Catherine approached, relief evident in her expression. Michael Middleton lay still in the hospital bed, connected to various monitors that tracked his vital signs with steady electronic beeps. He looked smaller somehow, more fragile than the robust man who had built a successful business and raised 3 children with unwavering love and support. Catherine took her mother's place beside the bed and reached for her father's hand, whispering words of encouragement that she hoped he could somehow hear. Meanwhile, across London, William's car was pulling up to the venue where the memorial service would take place. The building was surrounded by security barriers and filled with people whose lives had been forever changed by a single moment of tragedy. As William stepped out of his car, he carried with him not only his own emotions about Catherine's family crisis, but also the collective grief of everyone he was about to meet. The memorial service venue was a converted warehouse in East London, chosen specifically because it could accommodate the large number of families affected by the tragedy while maintaining an intimate atmosphere. The space had been transformed overnight, with rows of simple wooden chairs facing a small stage decorated with photographs and flowers. Each image told a story of a life cut short, dreams unfulfilled, families forever changed by a single moment of preventable horror. William arrived 15 minutes before the scheduled start time, a practice that had become second nature during his years of royal service. But as he walked through the entrance, accompanied by his security detail and private secretary, he felt the absence of Catherine more acutely than he had anticipated. She had a gift for these situations, an ability to connect with grieving people in a way that transcended formal protocol. Her presence often transformed official sympathy into genuine human connection. The families had been gathering since early morning, traveling from across the United Kingdom to attend this service. Many had never met each other before the tragedy that bound them together. But, in the past weeks, they had formed connections born of shared loss and mutual understanding. They filled the converted space with quiet conversations, occasional tears, and the kind of subdued energy that accompanies profound grief. Sarah Mitchell sat in the front row, clutching a photograph of her 18-year-old daughter Emma. It had been taken just 3 months earlier at Emma's graduation from college, her face glowing with excitement about starting university in the fall. That future had been erased in the span of seconds, leaving Sarah to navigate a world that no longer made sense. She had been looking forward to meeting the Princess of Wales, having read about her work with families facing loss and trauma. The announcement of Catherine's absence had been disappointing, but Sarah understood that royal obligations were complex and that family emergencies could not be planned around public schedules. Behind her, David and Margaret Thompson held hands tightly, their matching wedding rings clicking softly as their fingers intertwined. Their son James had been their only child, born after years of fertility treatments and miscarriages. At 21, he had been working part-time while studying engineering, full of plans for traveling the world and maybe starting his own consulting firm. The Thompsons had aged decades in the past month, their hair suddenly showing more gray, their faces marked by the kind of exhaustion that sleep could not cure. As William entered the main hall, the conversations gradually quieted. He moved through the space with practiced ease, stopping to speak briefly with organizers and offering quiet words to family members he encountered. But those watching closely could see subtle differences in his demeanor. His smile, while still warm and genuine, seemed to require more effort than usual. His customary confident bearing was unchanged, but there was something in his eyes that suggested he was carrying burdens beyond those immediately visible. The service began with a moment of silence that stretched longer than planned. In that quiet space, William found himself thinking not only about the young lives being remembered, but also about Catherine sitting beside her father's hospital bed. He imagined her holding Michael Middleton's hand, whispering encouragements, dealing with her own fear and uncertainty while he stood here surrounded by hundreds of people experiencing similar emotions. When the moment of silence ended, William approached the podium to deliver his prepared remarks. He had worked on the speech for hours, consulting with grief counselors and family advocates to ensure that his words would provide comfort without sounding hollow or disconnected from the reality of the family's experiences. But, as he looked out at the sea of faces before him, he realized that no words could adequately address the magnitude of their loss. His speech lasted 8 minutes and covered the themes of community support, the importance of remembering those who had died, and the resilience of the human spirit in the face of unthinkable tragedy. The words were carefully chosen and respectfully delivered, but William was acutely aware that they fell short of what these families needed. What they needed was the impossible: their loved ones returned to them, their futures restored, their pain erased. As he concluded his formal remarks, William noticed a young woman in the third row who was crying silently, her tears falling steadily onto a handwritten letter she held in her lap. She looked to be about the same age as some of the victims, perhaps a sister or close friend. The sight of her grief hit him with unexpected force, reminding him of his own experiences with loss, and the way tragedy could arrive without warning to destroy everything that seemed secure and permanent. The formal portion of the service concluded with a reading of the victims' names, each one followed by a brief moment of silence and the lighting of a candle. As the list progressed, William found himself memorizing the names, knowing that he would carry them with him long after this day ended. Emma Mitchell, James Thompson, Rebecca Park, Michael O'Brien. 23 names representing 23 families whose worlds had been permanently altered. After the formal ceremony, William was scheduled to spend time speaking individually with family members who wished to share memories of their loved ones or simply receive personal acknowledgement of their loss. This was often the most challenging part of such events, requiring him to provide comfort and connection while maintaining the emotional distance necessary to function in such an intense environment. Sarah Mitchell was among the first to approach him. She carried her photograph of Emma and a small pink journal that her daughter had kept throughout her final year of school. Through tears, she told William about Emma's dreams of becoming a teacher, her love of children, her plans to travel to Africa to volunteer at schools for disadvantaged youth. As she spoke, William found himself thinking about his own children and the dreams he held for their futures. The conversation with Sarah lasted nearly 10 minutes, longer than protocol typically allowed, but shorter than her grief required. When she finally stepped away, she pressed Emma's photograph into William's hands, asking him to keep it as a reminder of her daughter's life. The gesture was simple but profound, transforming the formal memorial service into something deeply personal. David and Margaret Thompson approached next, moving slowly and supporting each other with each step. They spoke about James's engineering studies, his part-time job at a local garage, his habit of calling them every Sunday evening to share the week's news. Margaret showed William a text message James had sent just hours before the tragedy, complaining about a difficult exam and promising to call later that evening. It was a mundane communication made precious by its finality. As the afternoon progressed, William spoke with dozens of family members, each conversation adding another layer to his understanding of the human cost of the tragedy. He heard about university plans that would never be fulfilled, careers that would never begin, relationships that would never develop. He also heard about the love that continued despite death, the pride that survived loss, and the determination of these families to ensure that their loved ones would be remembered. Meanwhile, across London, Catherine was experiencing her own intense emotional journey. Her father had regained consciousness during the early afternoon, his first words asking about his family and expressing confusion about where he was. The relief Catherine felt at hearing his voice was overwhelming, but it was tempered by the doctor's warnings about the recovery process ahead and the lifestyle changes that would be necessary. Michael Middleton had always been the steady foundation of their family, the quiet presence who provided support without seeking attention. Seeing him vulnerable and dependent was difficult for Catherine, but it also deepened her appreciation for the role he had played in shaping her into someone capable of handling the pressures of royal life. As she sat beside his bed, holding his hand and updating him on family news, Catherine found herself thinking about William and wondering how the memorial service was progressing. She knew the emotional toll such events took on her husband, and she felt guilty about not being there to provide the support he needed. Their partnership had become so essential to their public duties that her absence created a void that affected not just their personal relationship, but their professional effectiveness as well. The afternoon light was beginning to fade when William finally concluded his individual conversations with the grieving families. He had spent over 3 hours listening to stories, offering condolences, and trying to provide some measure of comfort to people experiencing unimaginable pain. His suit jacket was wrinkled from numerous embraces, his voice was hoarse from continuous conversation, and his emotional reserves were nearly depleted. As he prepared to leave the memorial service venue, William was approached by one final family member. Lisa Park was barely 25 years old, the older sister of Rebecca, one of the youngest victims. She had been waiting patiently throughout the afternoon, watching other families speak with the prince while gathering the courage to approach him herself. Rebecca had been just 16, still in secondary school, and full of teenage enthusiasm for life. She had been attending the event that turned tragic as a celebration of her acceptance into a prestigious arts program. Lisa carried with her a portfolio of Rebecca's artwork, paintings, and drawings that revealed remarkable talent and creativity. As she showed William her sister's work, her voice broke repeatedly, but she persisted in sharing details about Rebecca's artistic vision and her dreams of studying at the Royal College of Art. The conversation with Lisa lasted longer than any of the others, partly because of her youth and obvious struggle to process her loss, but also because her grief resonated with William's own experiences of losing someone young and full of potential. When Lisa finally thanked him for listening and began to walk away, William found himself calling after her, asking if she would stay in touch and let him know how she was managing in the months ahead. The drive back to Kensington Palace was conducted in relative silence, with William's protection officer and private secretary understanding that their principal needed time to decompress from the emotional intensity of the afternoon. The London traffic was heavy, giving William nearly an hour to reflect on the conversations he had experienced and the faces he would carry with him indefinitely. He thought about Sarah Mitchell's determination to keep Emma's memory alive through the establishment of a scholarship fund. He remembered David Thompson's quiet dignity as he described his son's engineering projects and dreams of improving infrastructure in developing countries. Most of all, he thought about Lisa Park and her portfolio of Rebecca's artwork, visual representations of a creative mind that would never reach its full potential. As his car turned into the gates of Kensington Palace, William realized that the day had changed him in ways he was only beginning to understand. He had attended dozens of similar events during his years of royal service, but this one felt different, perhaps because he had experienced it without Catherine's steadying presence, or perhaps because the separation from his wife had made him more aware of the importance of human connections and support systems. The palace seemed unusually quiet as he entered, most of the daytime staff having departed for their homes and families. William climbed the stairs to the private apartments he shared with Catherine, noting how empty the space felt without her presence. He had grown accustomed to debriefing from difficult royal engagements together, sharing both the challenges and the meaningful moments that made such duties worthwhile. Instead of that familiar ritual, William found himself alone with his thoughts and emotions, processing the day's experiences without the benefit of Catherine's insights and support. He changed out of his formal attire and called the hospital for an update on Michael Middleton's condition, learning that he had remained stable throughout the day and was expected to continue improving. The brief conversation with Catherine was necessarily focused on her father's medical situation and the family's plans for the coming days. They did not discuss the memorial service in detail, partly because of the public nature of hospital phone systems, and partly because both of them were too emotionally drained to fully process their respective experiences. As evening settled over London, William stood again at the bedroom window where he and Catherine had shared their silent goodbye that morning. The palace grounds were quiet now, illuminated by security lights that created long shadows across the courtyards. Somewhere across the city, Catherine was likely standing at a different window, looking out at the hospital parking lot and thinking about the day they had both endured separately. In a few hours, he would join her at the hospital, and they would begin the process of supporting her family through Michael's recovery. But, for now, William was alone with the memories of 23 young lives cut short, and the knowledge that his wife was dealing with her own family crisis. The silent goodbye they had shared that morning had proven to be more significant than either of them could have anticipated, marking not just a temporary separation, but a moment when the complex demands of royal duty had forced them to confront their individual strength and resilience. The hospital corridor had become familiar territory for Catherine during the long hours she had spent there. The antiseptic smell, the soft beeping of medical equipment, and the hushed conversations between doctors and nurses had created a backdrop of controlled urgency that defined her father's recovery process. As evening approached, she remained at Michael Middleton's bedside, watching the steady rise and fall of his chest while her mind wandered between relief at his improved condition and concern for William's emotional state following the memorial service. Michael had been awake for several hours now, though the medication kept him drowsy and sometimes confused about where he was and why the family had gathered around him. His moments of clarity were precious, filled with questions about his business, concerns about being a burden to his family, and gentle inquiries about Catherine's royal duties. She found herself editing her responses carefully, not wanting to add to his stress by mentioning the significant public engagement she had missed to be at his side. The decision to skip the memorial service had been weighing on Catherine throughout the day, not because she regretted choosing her father's bedside over royal duty, but because she understood the ripple effects of her absence. The families attending that service had been looking forward to meeting her, having read about her previous work with grieving communities and her gentle approach to providing comfort during difficult times. More importantly, William had been forced to carry the emotional burden of the event alone, without the partnership that had become essential to their public work. Dr. Helena Reeves, the cardiologist overseeing Michael's care, had been providing regular updates to the family throughout the day. Each conversation brought a mixture of encouraging news and realistic cautions about the recovery process ahead. The heart attack had been significant, but not massive, and Michael's overall health prior to the incident worked in his favor. However, lifestyle changes would be necessary, and the stress that had contributed to the cardiac event would need to be addressed through both medical treatment and personal adjustments. Catherine's mother, Carol, had been a constant presence at the hospital, managing the practical details while trying to process her own fear and exhaustion. Their marriage of over 40 years had been built on mutual support and shared responsibilities, and seeing Michael vulnerable and dependent was challenging everything Carol thought she understood about their relationship dynamics. She had always been the more outgoing partner, handling social situations and public interactions, while Michael provided quiet strength and business acumen. Now, she was being asked to be strong in ways that felt foreign and overwhelming. Pippa and James Middleton had taken turns staying at the hospital and managing practical matters at home. Their responses to their father's crisis reflected their different personalities and coping mechanisms. Pippa threw herself into research, learning everything she could about cardiac recovery and rehabilitation programs. James dealt with the business implications, contacting Michael's partners and clients to ensure that immediate concerns were addressed while longer-term plans could be developed. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows through the hospital room windows, Catherine received a text message from William indicating that the memorial service had concluded and he was returning to Kensington Palace. The message was brief and factual, providing no details about his emotional state or the specific events of the afternoon. She understood this restraint. Hospital communications were often monitored, and royal family members had learned to be cautious about expressing personal feelings in any potentially public forum. But Catherine could read between the lines of William's carefully neutral message. She knew her husband well enough to recognize when he was struggling emotionally, and she suspected that attending the memorial service alone had been more difficult than he would ever publicly admit. Their partnership had evolved over years of marriage to become more than just personal support. It was a professional necessity that enhanced their effectiveness in carrying out royal duties. The evening brought a shift change among the hospital staff, and with it, a subtle change in the atmosphere of Michael's room. The day staff had been focused on immediate medical concerns and stabilization procedures. The night team brought a different energy, more focused on comfort and gradual recovery. Catherine found these transitions oddly comforting, marking the passage of time in a situation where normal routines had been suspended. As visiting hours officially ended, Catherine made the difficult decision to leave the hospital and return to Kensington Palace. Her father was stable, sleeping peacefully, and surrounded by excellent medical care. Her mother and siblings would continue the overnight vigil, and Catherine would return early the following morning. The decision was practical and reasonable, but it still felt like a betrayal to leave before she was absolutely certain that the crisis had passed. The drive from the hospital back to Kensington Palace took Catherine through parts of London she rarely saw during her usual royal duties. The route passed through working-class neighborhoods where people were returning home from their jobs, stopping at local shops, and going about the ordinary business of daily life. She found herself thinking about the families from the memorial service, wondering how they were spending this evening and whether William's presence had provided any measure of comfort during their ongoing grief. Kensington Palace felt different when Catherine arrived home. The usual evening activities, homework supervision, bedtime routines, quiet conversations about the day's events, had been disrupted by the family crisis. Their children had been cared for by their nannies and had been told only that Grandpa Middleton was in the hospital, but was getting better. The careful balance between honesty and reassurance that defined royal parenting was being tested by circumstances that could not be entirely controlled or predicted. William was waiting in their private sitting room when Catherine arrived, still wearing the dark suit he had worn to the memorial service, but with his tie loosened and his jacket draped over a nearby chair. He looked exhausted in a way that went beyond physical fatigue, the kind of emotional depletion that came from spending hours absorbing other people's grief while maintaining professional composure. They embraced without speaking, and in that moment, Catherine felt the full impact of their separation during such emotionally demanding circumstances. She could sense the weight of the day William had carried alone, just as she suspected he could perceive the stress and worry she had experienced at her father's bedside. Their silent reunion was more meaningful than any conversation could have been, a recognition that their partnership extended far beyond the formal requirements of their royal roles. William updated Catherine on the details of the memorial service, describing the families he had met and the stories he had heard. He spoke about Sarah Mitchell and her daughter Emma's artistic ambitions, about David and Margaret Thompson's quiet dignity in the face of unimaginable loss, and about Lisa Park's determination to continue her sister's creative legacy. As he recounted these conversations, Catherine could see how each interaction had affected him, adding layers of responsibility and emotional connection that would influence his future approach to similar duties. Catherine shared the medical updates about her father, describing his periods of consciousness and confusion, the doctor's cautious optimism about his recovery, and the family's plans for supporting him through the rehabilitation process. She also expressed her guilt about missing the memorial service, explaining how she had wanted to be there to support both William and the grieving families he would meet. Their conversation continued late into the evening, covering not just the immediate events of the day, but the broader implications for their royal duties and personal relationship. They discussed how her father's health scare had highlighted their family's vulnerability to medical emergencies and the difficult choices such situations could create between personal obligations and public duties. They also acknowledged that William's experience of conducting such a significant royal engagement alone had revealed both his individual strength and the importance of their partnership. The memorial service had generated significant media coverage throughout the evening, with news reports focusing on William's solo appearance and speculating about Catherine's absence. The official palace statement had been minimal, citing only family matters as the reason for the Princess of Wales not attending the service. This discretion was appreciated by the Middleton family, who valued their privacy during the medical crisis, but it also fueled speculation about the nature of the emergency and its potential impact on future royal duties. William showed Catherine some of the photographs from the memorial service that had been taken by the official palace photographer. The images captured moments of genuine connection between William and the grieving families, but they also revealed subtle signs of the emotional toll the event had taken on him. In several pictures, his expression showed a depth of sadness that went beyond formal sympathy, suggesting that the day's conversations had affected him more personally than usual. One photograph particularly struck Catherine. It showed William speaking with Lisa Park, the young woman who had lost her sister Rebecca. The image captured a moment of intense conversation, with both William and Lisa leaning forward slightly, clearly engaged in meaningful dialogue. Catherine could see in William's expression the kind of empathetic connection that made him effective in such situations, but she also recognized the emotional cost such interactions demanded. As they prepared for bed, William and Catherine stood together at their bedroom window, looking out at the palace grounds that had been illuminated by security lights. It was the same window where they had shared their silent goodbye that morning, but everything had changed since then. They had both survived emotionally challenging days separately, and their reunion had reinforced the strength of their partnership while highlighting its importance to their individual well-being. Catherine thought about the families she had not met that day, wondering about their evening routines and how they were managing their grief in the privacy of their homes. She imagined Sarah Mitchell looking at photographs of her daughter Emma, David, and Margaret Thompson sitting in their son James's empty bedroom, and Lisa Park working on her own art while thinking about her sister Rebecca's unfulfilled dreams. William's thoughts remained with the memorial service and the responsibility he felt toward the families he had met. He understood that his royal role required him to represent more than just his own sympathies. He was expected to embody the nation's recognition of their loss and commitment to supporting them through their grief. The weight of this representation was something he carried constantly, but today it had felt particularly heavy without Catherine's presence to help distribute the emotional load. The bedroom was quiet except for the distant sounds of London traffic and the occasional footstep of security personnel conducting their rounds. Catherine and William lay in their bed, physically together but still processing their separate experiences of the day. The silence between them was comfortable and familiar, filled with the kind of understanding that came from years of shared experiences and mutual support. Neither of them slept well that night, their minds too active with the day's events and concerns about the challenges ahead. Catherine found herself thinking about her father's recovery process and the adjustments their family would need to make. William replayed conversations from the memorial service, wondering if he had provided adequate comfort and whether there was more he could have done to honor the memories of those who had died. The early morning hours brought a gradual shift from reflection to planning. Catherine would return to the hospital to check on her father's progress and support her mother through another day of medical uncertainty. William had a relatively light schedule of royal duties, but he knew that the emotional aftermath of the memorial service would influence his approach to future engagements with grieving communities. As dawn broke over London, Catherine and William prepared to face another day of balancing their personal concerns with their public responsibilities. The silent goodbye they had shared the previous morning had marked the beginning of one of the most emotionally challenging days of their marriage, but their reunion had strengthened their understanding of how essential their partnership was to both their personal happiness and their professional effectiveness. The morning routine proceeded quietly, with both Catherine and William moving through their preparations with the practiced efficiency that royal life demanded. But underneath their calm exterior, both were carrying the emotional weight of the previous day's experiences and the knowledge that similar challenges would inevitably arise in the future. Their role as future monarchs required them to be available to their subjects during times of national grief and crisis, but their humanity demanded that they also attend to their own family's needs during personal emergencies. The balance between these competing demands would continue to test their relationship and their individual resilience. The silent goodbye that had marked their separation the previous morning had become a symbol of the sacrifices royal duty required, but their reunion had demonstrated the strength they found in their partnership and their commitment to supporting each other through whatever challenges lay ahead. The second day at the hospital brought a different rhythm to the Middleton family's vigil. Michael's condition had continued to stabilize throughout the night, and the medical team was cautiously optimistic about beginning the next phase of his recovery. Catherine arrived early in the morning to find her father awake and significantly more alert than he had been the previous day. His first words to her were an apology for causing such worry and disrupting her royal duties, a response that was so characteristic of his selfless nature that it brought tears to her eyes. Dr. Reeves had scheduled a family meeting for mid-morning to discuss the treatment plan moving forward and the lifestyle adjustments that would be necessary to prevent future cardiac events. Catherine found herself taking detailed notes during this conversation, her organizational skills honed by years of royal briefings now applied to managing her father's medical care. The discussion covered medication regimens, dietary changes, exercise limitations, and stress management techniques that would need to become part of Michael's daily routine. The business implications of Michael's health scare were also becoming clearer as the day progressed. Party Pieces, the party supply company he had built over decades, would need temporary management arrangements while he focused on his recovery. James had been working with the company's senior staff to ensure that immediate operations could continue, but longer-term decisions about leadership and strategic direction would need to wait until Michael was better able to participate in such discussions. Catherine's phone buzzed repeatedly throughout the morning with messages from William, providing updates on his activities and asking about her father's progress. She could sense his continued concern about her emotional state and his frustration at not being able to provide more direct support. His royal schedule that day included a visit to a youth center and a brief meeting with representatives from several charitable organizations, duties that seemed mundane compared to the previous day's memorial service, but that still required his full attention and engagement. The media coverage of the memorial service had been extensive and generally positive, focusing on William's solo performance and his meaningful interactions with the grieving families. Several news outlets had featured interviews with family members who praised his genuine compassion and his ability to listen without offering empty platitudes. Sarah Mitchell had spoken to reporters about her conversation with William, describing how he had asked thoughtful questions about her daughter Emma's artistic interests and had seemed genuinely moved by the stories she shared. But the speculation about Catherine's absence continued to generate headlines and social media discussion. Royal watchers and journalists were analyzing every aspect of the official palace statement, looking for clues about the nature of the family emergency that had prevented her from attending such a significant event. Some commentators criticized the lack of transparency, arguing that the public deserved more information about why the Princess of Wales had been unavailable for such an important royal duty. Catherine found this media attention particularly frustrating because it reduced her father's serious medical crisis to fodder for royal gossip and speculation. The decision to maintain privacy about the specific nature of the emergency had been made to protect her family's dignity during a vulnerable time, but it had also created a vacuum that was being filled with increasingly creative theories about everything from marital problems to secret pregnancies. Carol Middleton was struggling more than she was willing to admit with the dual pressures of her husband's medical crisis and the media scrutiny surrounding their daughter's royal obligations. As a private person who had never sought public attention, even as her daughter's profile had risen dramatically, she found the speculation about their family's circumstances intrusive and hurtful. The suggestion in some quarters that Catherine was wrong to prioritize family over royal duty was particularly painful for a woman who had raised her children to value loyalty and personal relationships above external expectations. The afternoon brought unexpected visitors to the hospital. Prince Charles, who had been informed of Michael's condition through official channels, arrived quietly to check on his future in-law's progress and to provide support to Catherine during her family's crisis. His presence was both touching and diplomatically significant, demonstrating the royal family's genuine concern for the Middleton family, while also showing respect for the personal relationships that had been built over years of marriage between the two families. Charles spent nearly an hour with the Middleton family, listening to updates about Michael's condition and offering his own experiences with balancing public duties and family emergencies. His conversation with Catherine was particularly meaningful, as he shared insights about the impossible choices that royal life sometimes demanded and the importance of trusting one's instincts about when family had to take precedence over duty. His words carried special weight because they came from someone who had navigated decades of similar challenges and who understood the long-term implications of such decisions. The Prince of Wales also brought news about the public response to the memorial service and William's performance during the emotionally challenging event. The feedback from the grieving families had been overwhelmingly positive, with several family members specifically mentioning how much William's individual attention had meant to them. The memorial service had succeeded in its primary goal of honoring the victims while providing comfort to their families, but Charles acknowledged that the emotional cost to William had been significant. After Charles's departure, Catherine found herself reflecting on the strange parallel paths that royal duty and personal crisis had created in her life. While she sat in a sterile hospital room focused on her father's recovery, her husband was dealing with the aftermath of one of his most emotionally demanding royal engagements. Both experiences were testing their individual resilience and their ability to maintain their public roles while managing private challenges. The evening brought another significant development in Michael's recovery. The medical team announced that he would be able to leave the hospital in 2 days if his progress continued at the current pace. This news was cause for celebration, but it also meant that the family would need to quickly organize home care arrangements and support systems for his ongoing rehabilitation. Catherine volunteered to coordinate these efforts, drawing on her organizational experience from royal duties to ensure that all necessary preparations were made. William joined Catherine at the hospital that evening, arriving after completing his scheduled royal duties for the day. His presence brought a sense of completeness to the family gathering that had been missing during his absence the previous day. Michael's face lit up when he saw his son-in-law, and their conversation quickly turned to topics beyond medical concerns, covering everything from current events to plans for future family gatherings. The dynamic between William and the Middleton family had always been comfortable and natural, built on genuine affection and mutual respect rather than the formal deference that royal relationships sometimes required. Michael had never treated William as a future king first and a son-in-law second, an approach that had allowed them to develop a relationship based on shared interests and personal connection rather than institutional obligation. As the evening progressed, William and Catherine found themselves alone in the hospital corridor while other family members visited with Michael. The conversation they had been unable to have the previous day finally took place, with both of them sharing the emotional details of their separate experiences and processing the impact of their temporary separation during such challenging circumstances. William described the weight of conducting the memorial service alone, explaining how he had found himself looking for Catherine's familiar presence and support during particularly difficult moments. He spoke about specific conversations with grieving family members and how Catherine's absence had made him more aware of how much he depended on her partnership during emotionally demanding royal duties. The experience had been manageable, but it had also highlighted the importance of their collaboration in ways he had not previously fully appreciated. Catherine shared her own struggles with choosing between royal duty and family obligation, explaining the guilt she had felt about missing the memorial service and leaving William to handle such a significant event alone. She also expressed her frustration with the media speculation about her absence and her concern about how the situation might affect public perception of their commitment to their royal roles. Their conversation gradually shifted from processing the immediate crisis to discussing the broader implications for their future approach to royal duties. They acknowledged that similar conflicts between personal and public obligations would inevitably arise again, and that they needed to develop clearer frameworks for making such difficult decisions. The experience had taught them that while their partnership was essential to their effectiveness as royals, they also needed to be prepared to function independently when circumstances demanded it. The hospital's evening visiting hours were drawing to a close, but neither William nor Catherine wanted to leave while Michael was still awake and enjoying their company. They had missed precious time with him during the uncertainty of the previous day, and they were reluctant to lose these moments of normalcy and connection. The medical staff was understanding about extending visiting hours slightly, recognizing the importance of family support during the recovery process. As they finally prepared to leave the hospital, William and Catherine walked together through the corridors where she had spent so many anxious hours during the previous 36 hours. The familiar antiseptic smell and institutional atmosphere had become associated in her mind with fear and uncertainty, but now they also represented her father's survival and the beginning of his recovery journey. The drive back to Kensington Palace was quiet, with both William and Catherine lost in their own thoughts about the events of the past 2 days. They had both been tested by circumstances beyond their control, forced to navigate the complex demands of royal duty while dealing with personal crisis and emotional stress. The experience had revealed both their individual strength and their mutual dependence, highlighting the delicate balance they maintained between their public and private lives. The palace seemed more welcoming when they returned that evening, filled with the comfortable routines of family life that had been disrupted by the medical emergency. Their children had been told that Grandpa Middleton was feeling better and would be coming home soon, news that was received with relief and excitement. The normal bedtime rituals resumed, providing a sense of stability that had been missing during the crisis. As they settled into their evening routine, William and Catherine found themselves appreciating the ordinary moments that they had previously taken for granted. The simple act of reading bedtime stories to their children, discussing the next day's schedule, and sharing quiet conversation felt precious after 2 days of hospitals, memorial services, and emotional upheaval. The media coverage of William's hospital visit had been respectful but thorough, with photographers capturing images of him entering and leaving the medical facility. The pictures showed a man who appeared tired but composed, carrying himself with the dignity expected of his position while clearly focused on supporting his family during a personal crisis. The contrast with the previous day's images from the memorial service was striking, showing different aspects of his royal role and personal character. Royal commentators had begun analyzing the past 2 days as a significant moment in William and Catherine's development as future monarchs. Their handling of the crisis, choosing family over duty when necessary, maintaining dignity under pressure, and supporting each other through challenging circumstances, was being praised as evidence of their readiness for the even greater responsibilities that lay ahead. But for William and Catherine themselves, the analysis and commentary felt secondary to the personal lessons they had learned about their relationship and their individual capacity for handling crisis. The silent goodbye that had marked their separation 2 days earlier had led to experiences that tested their partnership in new ways and ultimately strengthened their understanding of what they meant to each other. As they prepared for sleep that second night, both William and Catherine felt the weight of the past 2 days settling into a deeper understanding of their roles, their responsibilities, and their relationship. The crisis was far from over. Michael's recovery would be a long process requiring ongoing family support and lifestyle adjustments. But the immediate emergency had passed, and they had proven to themselves and each other that they could handle whatever challenges their unique position might present. The bedroom window that had framed their silent goodbye now reflected their reunion and their shared commitment to facing future challenges together. Whatever tests lay ahead in their royal duties or personal lives, they had been reminded that their partnership was strong enough to weather temporary separations and that their love for each other provided a foundation that could support even the heaviest burdens their positions might require them to carry. 3 weeks after Michael Middleton's heart attack, life had settled into a new rhythm that accommodated both his recovery needs and the ongoing demands of royal duty. Catherine and William had learned to navigate the delicate balance between family support and public obligations, developing systems and backup plans that allowed them to respond to future crises without completely abandoning their responsibilities to the crown and the British people. Michael's homecoming had been carefully orchestrated to ensure his transition from hospital care to home recovery was as smooth as possible. Carol had transformed their ground floor to accommodate his temporary mobility limitations, while James had arranged for business associates to handle the day-to-day operations of party pieces. The family had rallied around the patriarch with characteristic Middleton determination, but everyone understood that this crisis had fundamentally changed their dynamics and expectations for the future. The rehabilitation process was progressing well, though it required significant lifestyle adjustments that challenged Michael's naturally independent nature. Daily medications, dietary restrictions, scheduled rest periods, and limited physical activity were difficult concepts for a man who had built his success through energy, determination, and hands-on involvement in every aspect of his business. Catherine found herself serving as an unofficial coordinator between her father's medical team, her family's emotional needs, and her own royal obligations. The memorial service families had not been forgotten in the weeks following William's solo appearance at their service. Several of them had maintained contact with Kensington Palace, sending updates about their ongoing grief processes and expressing appreciation for the meaningful interactions they had experienced with the prince. Sarah Mitchell had established a scholarship fund in her daughter Emma's memory, while David and Margaret Thompson had begun working with safety advocates to prevent future tragedies like the one that had claimed their son James. Lisa Park, the young artist who had lost her sister Rebecca, had sent William a letter that arrived on a particularly difficult day when he was questioning whether his presence at the memorial service had provided any real comfort to the grieving families. Her handwritten note described how his willingness to listen to her stories about Rebecca had helped her feel that her sister's memory was being honored by someone who truly understood the magnitude of their loss. She had included a small sketch of Rebecca, drawn from memory, and had asked William to keep it as a reminder of their conversation. The media attention surrounding Catherine's absence from the memorial service had gradually faded, replaced by new royal stories and public concerns. However, the incident had sparked ongoing discussions among royal commentators about the challenges facing modern monarchs who were expected to maintain both personal authenticity and institutional duty. Some praised Catherine's choice to prioritize family during a medical emergency, while others argued that royal obligations should take precedence except in the most extreme circumstances. William and Catherine had spent considerable time discussing these criticisms and their implications for future decisions. They had consulted with senior palace officials, constitutional experts, and trusted advisors about developing clearer protocols for managing conflicts between personal and public obligations. The conversations had resulted in new guidelines that provided more flexibility for royal family members to address family emergencies while maintaining their commitment to scheduled public duties. The experience had also strengthened William's resolve to modernize aspects of royal protocol that seemed outdated or unnecessarily rigid. He had witnessed firsthand how the traditional expectation of duty above all else could create impossible choices for royal family members, and he was determined to ensure that future generations would have more reasonable frameworks for balancing their human needs with their institutional responsibilities. Catherine's relationship with her father had deepened during his recovery process. The crisis had reminded both of them how precious their time together was and had strengthened their appreciation for the quiet moments of family life that were often overshadowed by the demands of public service. Michael had expressed particular pride in Catherine's handling of the difficult choices she had faced, telling her that her decision to be at his bedside had meant more to him than any royal duty could have justified. The children had adapted remarkably well to their grandfather's changed circumstances, showing the resilience and empathy that William and Catherine had worked hard to cultivate despite their privileged circumstances. They had learned to speak more quietly around Grandpa Middleton, to help with small tasks during visits, and to understand that his recovery was a long process that required patience and support from everyone in the family. The royal diary had been carefully managed in the weeks following the crisis to ensure that William and Catherine could both attend their most significant joint engagements while still accommodating Catherine's family support responsibilities. Their first major public appearance together since the memorial service and hospital vigil was at a charity gala supporting organizations that provided assistance to families facing medical emergencies, an event that felt particularly meaningful given their recent personal experience. The gala provided an opportunity for Catherine to address indirectly the speculation about her earlier absence from royal duties. During her brief remarks, she spoke about the importance of family support during health crises and the need for workplaces and institutions to provide flexibility for employees dealing with personal emergencies. Her words were carefully chosen to avoid specific references to her own situation while clearly indicating her perspective on the balance between professional obligations and family responsibilities. William's speech at the same event focused on the broader theme of community support during difficult times, drawing on his experiences from the memorial service to discuss the importance of showing up for people during their darkest moments. He spoke about the conversations he had with grieving families and the privilege of being trusted with their stories and memories. His remarks were deeply personal while maintaining the dignity and respect that such topics required. The evening marked a significant moment in their recovery from the crisis, demonstrating that they had emerged stronger and more united from the challenges they had faced separately and together. The silent goodbye that had marked their separation 3 weeks earlier had evolved into a deeper understanding of their partnership and their individual capacities for handling the demands of their unique positions. Royal photographers captured numerous images throughout the gala evening, but one photograph in particular would become symbolic of their journey through the recent crisis. The image showed William and Catherine standing together during the event's moment of silence for families affected by various tragedies, their hands clasped, and their faces reflecting both solemnity and shared strength. The photograph appeared on front pages across the United Kingdom and was widely shared on social media with comments about their visible partnership and mutual support. In the weeks that followed, letters and messages began arriving at Kensington Palace from families who had experienced similar conflicts between family emergencies and work obligations. Many people shared their own stories of impossible choices between caring for loved ones and meeting professional responsibilities, expressing gratitude for Catherine's demonstration that family sometimes had to come first, even for someone in her extraordinary position. One particularly moving letter came from a nurse who had been forced to choose between attending her mother's surgery and working a critical shift at her hospital. She described the guilt she had felt about prioritizing her family and the relief she experienced when she learned that even the Princess of Wales had made a similar choice. The letter spoke to the broader impact of Catherine's decision, showing how royal actions could validate and support ordinary people facing extraordinary circumstances. The memorial service families continued to play an important role in William and Catherine's understanding of their public duties. Several of them were invited to participate in future royal events focused on grief support and trauma recovery, creating ongoing relationships that extended far beyond the single day of the memorial service. These connections had transformed a formal royal duty into meaningful personal relationships that enriched both the royal couple's work and the family's healing processes. Sarah Mitchell became particularly close to Catherine, bonding over their shared experience of balancing multiple responsibilities while supporting family members through difficult times. Their friendship developed naturally through follow-up conversations about the scholarship fund and gradually expanded to include discussions about parenting, career challenges, and the ongoing process of healing from loss. The relationship demonstrated how genuine connections could emerge from royal duties when both parties approached interactions with authenticity and openness. The business implications of Michael's health scare had been resolved more smoothly than initially expected. James's temporary management of party pieces had revealed his natural aptitude for business leadership, and the crisis had accelerated discussions about succession planning that might otherwise have been delayed for years. Michael's gradual return to limited involvement in the company had been carefully coordinated with his medical team to ensure that work stress did not compromise his recovery. The extended Middleton family had also grown closer through the shared experience of supporting Michael's recovery. Relatives who had previously seen each other mainly during holidays and special occasions had become regular presences in daily life, creating a support network that strengthened everyone involved. Catherine found particular comfort in these deepened family relationships, which provided stability and normalcy that balanced the sometimes surreal aspects of royal life. As autumn progressed, William and Catherine began planning their next major royal tour, a 3-day visit to Scotland that would include engagements focused on youth mental health, environmental conservation, and community resilience. The planning process incorporated lessons learned from their recent crisis, including backup arrangements and communication protocols that would allow them to handle future family emergencies more smoothly. The tour preparation also reflected their evolving understanding of their royal roles and their determination to make their public duties more personally meaningful. They requested briefings that included not just official protocols and diplomatic considerations, but also background information about the communities they would visit and the individual stories of people they might meet. Their goal was to approach each engagement with the same authentic concern they had brought to the memorial service and hospital vigil. The anniversary of the tragedy that had prompted the memorial service was approaching, and William had been asked to participate in a remembrance ceremony that would honor the victims while celebrating the resilience their families had shown in the months since their loss. Catherine would be able to join him for this event, having arranged her schedule to ensure that both her father's needs and her royal obligations could be accommodated. The upcoming ceremony represented a full-circle moment for William and Catherine, marking not just the anniversary of a national tragedy, but also the anniversary of their own crisis and the lessons they had learned about partnership, duty, and the complex demands of their unique positions. The silent goodbye that had once symbolized impossible choices had evolved into a deeper understanding of how they could support each other through whatever challenges their roles might present. Their relationship had been tested by circumstances neither of them could have anticipated or controlled, but they had emerged with strengthened conviction about their shared mission and their individual capabilities. The crisis had taught them that their partnership was essential not just for their personal happiness, but for their effectiveness as representatives of the crown, while also demonstrating that they possessed the individual strength necessary to carry their responsibilities independently when circumstances demanded it. Looking toward the future, William and Catherine understood that their experience during the memorial service and family medical emergency had prepared them for the even greater challenges that would come with increased royal responsibilities. They had learned to navigate impossible choices, to support each other through emotional difficulties, and to maintain their public duties while honoring their private obligations. The silent goodbye that had marked their separation during the crisis had ultimately become a symbol of their commitment to each other and their shared understanding of the sacrifices their positions required. But, more importantly, it had demonstrated that even in their extraordinary circumstances, love, family, and partnership remained the foundation upon which everything else was built. Their wordless moment of farewell had indeed left the world breathless, not because of its drama, but because of its authentic representation of the human struggles that exist even at the highest levels of public service and royal duty.